Imagine walking through an endless expanse of corn, the tall stalks swaying in the breeze, the air thick with the scent of earth and something far older. Now picture hearing something that isn't the wind, something moving just out of sight, something watching. You try to walk faster, but the rustling grows louder, the distance between you and the unknown shrinking with every step. The darkness closes in around you. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are diving into 3 terrifying tales from real people who encountered something they couldn't explain in the most eerie places, cornfields. If you've ever wandered into one of these fields, you'll know how easily you can feel disoriented and lost. Story 1. The Watcher in the Corn, by Ethan Fisher. My name is Ethan Fisher, and the experience I had in the cornfield behind my childhood home still terrifies me to this day. I grew up in a small rural town, and my house was surrounded by fields on all sides. The land was owned by my family, and the cornfields were like an old friend, familiar, comforting, and safe. But one evening, when I was 16, something changed, and that cornfield became the site of one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It all started on a warm summer evening. My parents were away for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. I was feeling restless, stuck inside with nothing to do. So I decided to take a walk through the cornfield that bordered our property. It was something I'd done 1,000 times before, a simple, peaceful stroll to clear my mind. But this time it felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if something was waiting for me out there, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out the back door, heading toward the field. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the rows of tall corn. The stalks swayed gently in the breeze, their rustling sound almost soothing. I made my way down the familiar dirt path between the rows, the earth beneath my boots warm and solid. It felt peaceful, almost nostalgic, until it didn't. As I ventured further into the field, I started to feel watched. It was subtle at first, just a slight sensation that I was not alone. I stopped and turned, expecting to see someone walking behind me, but the field was empty. I shrugged it off. After all, I was in a place I knew like the back of my hand. I continued my walk, but the feeling only grew stronger. Every step I took, I felt as if eyes were on me, hidden in the shadows of the corn. It wasn't a rational fear, but more of a primal one, the feeling that something was lurking, just beyond sight, and it was aware of my every move. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, telling myself it was just the wind, the evening growing darker, playing tricks on my mind. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible. At first I thought it was the wind again, but this time it was different. The voice was too deliberate, too clear. Ethan, my heart skipped a beat. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I whipped around, scanning the rows of corn for any sign of movement. There was nothing, no person, no animal, nothing but the quiet rustle of the corn in the wind. I laughed nervously, chalking it up to my imagination. But just as I began to turn back, I heard it again. Ethan. This time the voice was closer, and I could hear the subtle shift of footsteps in the dirt. Someone or something was walking just behind me, though I couldn't see them. I spun around again, my pulse racing, but the field was empty. My mind was racing now, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I being pranked? Had someone come out to mess with me? But no one else was supposed to be out here. I was alone. I tried to continue my walk, but the sense of dread only deepened. Every time I moved, the footsteps moved with me. Every time I stopped, they stopped. I could hear the crunching of the earth beneath invisible feet, the breath of something heavy in the air. My skin was crawling, every instinct telling me to run. And then it happened. The distinct feeling of fingers gripping the back of my shirt, pulling me back. I froze, my body frozen in place as my heart slammed against my chest. My breath hitched in my throat as I slowly turned around, expecting to find someone standing behind me. But again, there was nothing, just the towering stalks of corn swaying softly in the wind. I don't remember what happened next. Maybe it was fear taking over, or maybe it was pure instinct, but I ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, weaving between the rows of corn, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of my footsteps was drowned out by the pounding of my heart. But in the distance, I could still hear the whispers. "Ethan, you're not alone." I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I broke through the edge of the field and found myself back on the familiar dirt road that led to the house. Gasping for breath, I turned around to look back at the field. It was quiet. The moonlight bathed the rows of corn, and the wind had died down. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or had something truly been watching me, waiting for me to wander too far? Either way, I never went back into that cornfield again. But sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear the whisper, soft but clear, "Ethan." Story 2. The Haunting Cornfield by Emma Wallace. My name is Emma Wallace, and what happened in that cornfield is something I'll never forget. It was a normal summer day when I decided to help my friend Sarah harvest the corn on her family's farm. The field was large, stretching for miles behind her old farmhouse. We'd spent countless days playing in those fields as kids, but I'd never been there after dark, something that would soon change. It was late afternoon when we started working, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of corn. Sarah's family had been farming for generations, and the cornfield had always been a place of comfort and nostalgia. But there was something unsettling about the field that day, something I couldn't put my finger on. As we worked, I noticed Sarah seemed distant, distracted. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to make conversation. She glanced at me, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't understand. "Yeah, I've been hearing things in the field lately. At night, when I walk out to check on the crops, I feel like I'm being watched." I laughed, thinking she was just tired or joking. "It's just your imagination, Sarah. The field's been here forever." But Sarah didn't laugh with me. She just shrugged and went back to picking the corn, her movements slower than usual. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but as the sun began to set, the unease only grew. The air seemed to change, heavier somehow, and the wind started to rustle through the leaves of the corn, making eerie noises. As the last light of the day faded, we decided to head back to the farmhouse. Sarah was the first to stand up, but as she did, she stopped suddenly, staring into the distance, her face drained of color. "Sarah?" I asked, concerned. She didn't answer. She just stared at the edge of the field, her gaze fixed on something in the darkness between the rows of corn. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I pressed, stepping toward her. "I saw someone," she whispered, her voice shaking, "at the edge of the field. They were standing there watching us." My heart skipped a beat. I turned, scanning the field for any signs of movement, but it was too dark to see clearly. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. "There's no one out there," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Sarah shook her head. "I know what I saw. They were tall, thin, and wearing a long coat. I couldn't see their face, but I swear they were staring right at us." We stood in silence for a long moment, both of us too frightened to move. The wind had picked up, the rustling of the corn growing louder, almost as if the field itself were alive, whispering secrets to us. The night felt alive with something unnatural. "I don't want to stay here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Let's go." We turned to leave, but as we walked toward the farmhouse, I heard a rustling sound behind us, faint but unmistakable. A voice, soft and breathy, echoed through the stillness of the night. "Sarah!" I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was unmistakable. It was the voice of a man, but it was distorted, as if it came from somewhere deep within the earth itself. "Sarah, come back." I whipped around, but the field was empty. No one was there, just the dark, swaying corn, standing silent and unmoving in the night. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Was it the wind? My imagination? But Sarah was gone. She had run ahead, her footsteps echoing in the distance, her fear more tangible than mine. I ran after her, my heart pounding, but when I reached the farmhouse, she was already inside, locking the door behind her. She didn't speak much for the rest of the night, and neither did I. We both knew something was wrong, something that had always been in the cornfield, waiting. To this day, I don't know what we heard or what Sarah saw, but I know one thing for certain. I will never set foot in that cornfield again. Whatever it is that lurks there, it isn't human, and it's waiting for someone to come back. Story 3, The Cursed Cornfield, by Jack Turner. My name is Jack Turner, and I'll never forget the day I entered the cornfield on the old Ferguson farm. It was a piece of land that had been abandoned for decades, a place where the local kids dared each other to go, but no one ever stayed long. The rumors about that place were chilling, whispers about strange happenings and eerie sightings. But one afternoon, I found myself standing at the edge of that very field, eager to prove the stories wrong. It all started when I was hanging out with a couple of friends, Tom and Greg. We were tired of the usual hangout spots, so we decided to explore the Ferguson farm. The place had been empty for years, the farmhouse decaying and the surrounding fields overtaken by wild growth. But the cornfield, well, it was different. There was a kind of unnatural stillness around it, as if it had been untouched by time or human hands. We climbed over the rusted fence and stepped into the tall, overgrown corn. At first, everything seemed normal. The air smelled earthy, and the rustling of the corn leaves was the only sound. But as we ventured deeper into the field, I started to feel watched. It was subtle at first, a chill that crawled down my spine. But as we moved forward, it grew more intense. Greg, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "You guys are just freaking yourselves out," he said, brushing aside the growing tension in the air. But Tom and I weren't so sure. The further we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The sunlight seemed dimmer, filtered through the thick canopy of corn above us, and the wind stopped. There was an unsettling silence. We reached the center of the field, and that's when it happened. The ground beneath our feet seemed to tremble, just slightly, like something was moving below the surface. I looked at Tom, who was as pale as I felt. "Did you feel that?" I asked. But before he could answer, we heard it, a soft, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Let's go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But as we turned to leave, I saw something that froze my blood. In the distance, near the edge of the field, I saw a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long, gangly arms that seemed to stretch unnaturally as it moved toward us. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze on me, burning into my very soul. "Run!" I screamed. Tom and Greg didn't need any more encouragement. We turned and bolted, but it felt like the cornfield was shifting, closing in on us. I couldn't tell if the figure was following us, or if it was just the panic making my heart race. But every step I took felt heavier than the last. The field stretched on forever, the rows of corn twisting and turning, making it impossible to escape. By the time we reached the edge of the field, the sun had almost set, and the figure had disappeared. We didn't stop running until we were safely outside the fence, breathing heavily, drenched in sweat, and shaking with fear. But that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, I heard about the farmer who used to own the Ferguson land. They said he'd gone mad after his family disappeared without a trace, and some believed he had made a deal with something dark, something that still haunted the cornfield. And after that day, I began to understand why people whispered about that place. I never went back, and I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted by something that wasn't human. The cornfield was cursed, and it wasn't a place anyone should ever wander into. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.